Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really profound philosophical text that is going to challenge basically everything about our relationship with the animal kingdom. We usually just view animals as pets, food, or tools. But today, we're looking through a completely different lens. We're going to look at animals as living subjects with their own experiences, their own vulnerabilities, and crucially, their own immense moral significance. Here's how we're breaking this down today. First, what is an animal? Second, inside the animal mind. Third, the ethics of use. Fourth, ecology, culture, and kinship. And finally, number 5, humanity's moral mirror. Before we really get into the weeds, I want you to sit with this one powerful question. Are humans fundamentally different from animals? We absolutely love to define ourselves by our separation from the animal kingdom, right? We focus on our reason, our complex language, our culture. But asking this question forces us to check our egos a bit. It asks if we're actually above animals, if we're simply living among them, or if, maybe, we are ultimately responsible for them. Let's jump into Section 1. What is an animal? It's time to break down some boundaries. To understand animals philosophically, we've got to nail down a definition for animality. Think way back to philosophers like Aristotle. He actually understood that animals possess a living soul. Now, he didn't mean that in some mystical woo-woo sense. He meant that animals have sensation, desire, movement, and a real purpose. Their existence is so much more than just biological programming. They aren't just meat machines. They have an embodied, living existence that is totally filled with hunger, fear, and deep survival instincts. Usually, we just view animals through our own human perception. We see them as objects existing inside our world. But contrast that with phenomenological reality. Specifically, this brilliant concept called the Umwelt. The Umwelt basically suggests that a dog, a bird, or a fish isn't just an extra in your movie. They experience their own unique, deeply meaningful world based on their specific senses and instincts. When we just measure them by human standards, we're totally missing their reality. Moving right along to Section 2. Inside the animal mind, we're looking at intelligence, emotion, and suffering. This brings up a really fascinating philosophical hurdle. We almost always equate intelligence with human language or abstract reasoning. But seriously, must an animal think like a human in order to think at all? Just look out into the wild. You've got ingenious tool use in apes. You've got crows solving multi-step puzzles. You've got the incredible multi-generational memory of elephants. Intelligence is definitely not a one-size-fits-all trait. It takes on extraordinary forms that are perfectly adapted to what a species needs to survive. And that leads us to something even deeper, sentience. Simply put, it's the capacity to feel. We see animals show fear, joy, grief, attachment. But crucially, sentience is the ability to suffer and feel physical pain. Philosopher Peter Singer famously argues that this is the absolute bedrock for moral consideration. When an animal is in distress, when it's mourning or in pain, that sentience literally demands our moral attention. We can't just brush it off because they aren't human. Which brings us to Section 3, the ethics of use, or animals as means and ends. This is where theory hits reality. We have to confront the practical collision that happens when vulnerable, sentient creatures intersect with human industry. This perfectly illustrates how different philosophical frameworks evaluate our everyday interactions with the animal world. Take factory farming. We can look at that through utilitarian ethics, weighing the fleeting pleasure of a male against massive systemic suffering. With zoos, we're examining the philosophy of the spectacle. Are we just turning living beings into mere images for our own entertainment? Working animals bring up labor ethics. Are they partners or are they exploited tools? And pets introduce the ethics of care, which teaches us a lot about responsibility and relational morality. All of these scenarios really boil down to one huge central ethical dilemma. It's drawn from an expansion of Kantian ethics. Is it wrong to treat a living subject merely as a means to human ends? Immanuel Kant originally focused this idea strictly on rational humans, but modern animal ethics says, hey, wait a minute, we need to extend this respect. If an animal is a living subject with its own life, does using it strictly as property or entertainment violate the fundamental moral respect owed to any living being? All right, Section 4, ecology, culture, and kinship, expanding the web of life. You literally can't talk about animals without talking about the environments that sustain them, right? Enter deep ecology. This is a philosophy that says a species has intrinsic value. That means it's valuable in and of itself, totally regardless of whether humans find it useful. Why? Because it participates in the shared, deeply interdependent life of the Earth. So when human expansion causes habitat destruction or extinction, it's not just a biological loss, it's an irreversible moral tragedy. An entire unique way of experiencing the world just vanishes.
Now, we're constantly using animals to understand ourselves, but it comes with a hidden cost. We see lions as courage, dogs as loyalty, birds as freedom. Psychologist Carl Jung even noted that animals act as archetypes for forces deep within the human psyche. But here is the danger. We get so obsessed with the majestic symbols in our myths and stories that we turn a blind eye to the actual breathing and sometimes suffering creature right in front of us.
To counter that kind of abstraction, the source text points to Filipino relational philosophy, which is just brilliant. In this cultural lens, animals aren't just distant poetic symbols. They are deeply, practically woven right into everyday survival and community. Whether it's the carabao working in the farming fields or the street dogs and cats sharing the urban space, animals are recognized as part of the web of home. Looking at these grounded daily interactions gives us a super practical view of coexistence, care, and mutual responsibility. And honestly, that leads us to a pretty stark, unavoidable realization, echoed perfectly in this famous utilitarian thought. If a being can suffer, there can be no moral justification for refusing to take that suffering into consideration. Think about that. If we accept that an animal feels pain, our moral circle simply has to expand. Indifference is no longer an option when you recognize that vulnerability exists way beyond just human beings. Bringing it all home, Section 5, Humanity's Moral Mirror, the true measure of civilization. So, how do we actually put this philosophy into practice? By actively expanding our moral circle in 4 key steps. First, we have to genuinely acknowledge animal sentience and vulnerability. Second, as philosophers like Schopenhauer taught us, we must recognize that true compassion for others is the actual foundation of morality. Third, we've got to cultivate virtue ethics in our everyday choices, from what we put on our dinner plate to how we treat our pets. And finally, we have to change how we measure greatness. A truly mature civilization doesn't prove its greatness by dominating life, it proves it by protecting it. The text argues that, ultimately, our treatment of animals is a mirror. It asks us directly, what kind of person are we becoming through the way we treat animals? Our interactions with them expose our tenderness, sure, but they also expose our cruelty. They highlight our immense capacity for love, but also our arrogance and our desire for domination. Taking a philosophical view of animals isn't just about saving them. It's profoundly about saving our own character. I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to chew on long after this explainer is over. Animals are the silent philosophers of the earth. Through their vulnerability, their wild freedom, their suffering, and their companionship, they don't even need language to teach us. By merely existing beside us, they are constantly teaching us how to become more humane. What are they teaching you?